So good evening, everyone. I'm Kourtney Andar. I'm really excited to be joining you all this evening. Thank you so much for tuning in on YouTube. Thank you to the residents for joining us, for leading us through the chant and through the sit. I want to specifically thank Roshi, Joan Halifax, for the wonderful opportunity to speak with you all tonight. I really greatly appreciate it. Thank you to the Upaya Sangha. You all have been really wonderful. The last few years I've been a member of Upaya has been really amazing. It's really become my family here in Santa Fe, and it's become my spiritual home. And I'm just thrilled that we've been meeting on Zoom on Thursdays, every Thursday, as well as every fourth Sunday for what we are calling Dharma discussion groups. So it's just been amazing to do this with you all over the last few months since we've all been staying home so much. I want to thank my sweet wife, Sophie, for being so supportive and for standing by me for so many years and just welcoming me into her life and just giving me all of her love and support. So thank you, Sophie. And thank you to all of my family who is watching. Hopefully some of them were able to tune in today. Hi, Mom. I think it's just really cool to have this opportunity. And another thank you to the staff at the Santa Fe Art Institute. SFAI has become another home for me, another family for me. So Jamie and Netapan and Raquel and Tony and Renee and the board of trustees and all of the beautiful, wonderful residents who have come through SFAI over the past few years since I've been there. It's been an amazing learning experience from you all. So thank you so much. Maybe one of the first things I want to do, oh, you know what, before I forget, I want to thank the Emerging Leaders Group too. The Emerging Leaders Group is a local group here in town that is geared towards providing leadership training and networking opportunities and facilitations and trainings for emerging leaders here in Santa Fe, mostly from the nonprofit sector and the government sector. It's really a wonderful program. I'm happy to be a part of that. So one of the things I want to do to start this talk off is share a photo with you. And I'm gonna put this in the screen and hopefully you all can see it okay. You might have to cover my face to see it, but when you're looking at a photo of my grandfather, so that's him staring down some really attentive young kids in Chicago, Illinois, in the 1970s. And maybe you've seen this photo before, it's possible. This photo is of my grandfather, Jerry Dunnigan, and he is talking to some kids in the breakfast program as a part of the Black Panther Party for Self-Defense, the chapter in Chicago. Yes, the same chapter that Chairman Fred Hampton served in. So this photo is my grandfather, Jerry Dunnigan, probably saying something really intense to these kids. He's got their full attention. And you can see this photo in this book, and it's called Power to the People, The World of the Black Panthers. And as a matter of fact, my father-in-law bought me this book because he knew my grandfather was in the Black Panther Party, but he did not know that the photo was in here. So it was really quite awesome as a gift to show him. That matter of fact, that's my grandfather in the book. Thank you. The reason why I bring that up is because my grandfather is currently in prison. He has been in prison since the 70s for various reasons. He has a life sentence. As a matter of fact, it amounts to what is a double life sentence. He will never leave the prison in Illinois. I've seen him several times. I've visited him several times as a child, and I've communicated with him via letter as well. Of course, it's him being a Black Panther wasn't the only reason that he is incarcerated, but it is a major reason why he is incarcerated. And the reason why I bring that up is because if we're talking about way-seeking mind, and we are part of a practice where we are honoring our ancestors, honoring those who come before us. I want to make sure that, he gets on screen and his name gets out there and people know who he is. You can also find him in a documentary called Black Panther Party, Vanguard of the Revolution. And you can see that documentary on Netflix. I believe it's on Netflix. So you can watch that documentary and see his photo flash up too. That's my history. That's my ancestry. I come from a radical family. I come from a family of activists, but I also come from a family of service members, police officers. As a matter of fact, my dad is retiring from the Fort Worth Police Department this month. This month, he's been a police officer for over 30 years between Chicago and Fort Worth. He served, as a matter of fact, my mom also was a police officer. She served in the Springfield, Illinois Police Department when I was basically in high school. Okay, so that kind of starts the path, yeah? That's where we start way seeking mind. I'm from Illinois. I was born in Chicago. My mom moved me and my siblings to Springfield, Illinois. She pursued her bachelor's degree there. And while she was there, she experienced some pretty horrendous racism and sexism in the police department. So it was so bad that she decided to file a lawsuit against the city of Springfield, Illinois. And they settled that out of court. It became part of a joint lawsuit brought on by the NAACP chapter in Illinois, along with some other Black officers, for many failures of that police department over the decades. You can probably still search some of the news articles that were written about my mom. Renetta Frazier is her name, Renetta Frazier. And it was published in the local news weekly there. It was covered all over the news. That was a really horrible experience for my family. It became so bad, even though we won a lawsuit, it became so bad that we moved from Springfield, Illinois, and my mom moved us to the state of Georgia. But at that time, I also enrolled in classes at the University of Missouri. So I started college in 2004. And, after all of that, I felt like I was finally on the way to becoming kind of a normal college kid, getting through all of this trauma. Our family was moving on. We had a nice life in Georgia. I started classes. And what happened was I became part of a group on campus that was recruiting students to join what was known as a peer education program. So peer education is exactly what it sounds like. It is your peers training each other on violence prevention and preventing sexual assault on campus. Some of you may know that anti-sexual assault became a movement on college campuses all around the nation. There were regional meetups with these kinds of groups. I went to conferences while I was in college, training each other and learning how to prevent violence on campus. But what does that mean? How do you prevent sexual assault and violence on campus? Well, my role in that program was for the men on campus, to train males and men on campus to learn about masculinity, to learn about patriarchy, to learn about pro-feminism. And that's what I helped teach on campus. We had a program for Greek letter students, so for students in fraternities and sororities, as well as just, regular students who wanted to learn how to do this. And as a matter of fact, I counted a tremendous privilege to have been part of a program that was extremely comprehensive. It was a credited program. I got 3 credit hours for it, so it was a class. But let me tell you, when I first started that program, it was a weekend retreat. That's how intense this was. I left that retreat crying. I was like, I can't believe this issue is so huge on my own campus. Wow, what do you mean 1 in 3, 1 in 4 women experience sexual assault? That's bananas. How is that? I never knew any of this before I went to college, but I did know about racism, of course. I did know about some of the connections to other social justice issues. I did know that, but I did not know the full extent of just the wildness of men's violence against women. It was a tremendous opportunity for me. That program was led by some of the same women who were also activists in the local community in Columbia, Missouri. And they led what was known as the Center for Social Justice and the Women's Center on campus. So I actually got to work for the Women's Center. That was really tremendous. I learned what became a model known as bystander intervention. Bystander intervention. There's a new term these days called be an upstander and not a bystander. I like that even more, be an upstander. But at the time it was bystander intervention, and we trained each other to recognize when violence was forming, when it was first developing, to notice the signs before it got too bad. We would then intervene, and we trained each other on intervention tactics. That's what we did. So for instance, we trained each other to say, if you're at a party, if you're at a bar, watch each other's drinks. If you're at a party, ask your friends, let me know when you want to go home. So if I don't see you by that time, I know something's wrong and I can come find you. Let me know if this guy is bothering you. Is he bothering you? Well, we can leave. We can leave if you want to. Those are the kind of things that we looked out for, as well as trying to draw connections to other issues on campus. And what are those other issues? Well, I was at the University of Missouri, and the University of Missouri was experiencing its own bout of racist happenings on campus. I was one of the frequenters of the Black Culture Center on campus, and one morning we found cotton dumped on the front lawn of the Black Culture Center. One morning we saw a news in the newspaper that some white kids had smeared feces on the window of the dorm of a student of color, right? And so these were the kind of things that were happening on campus. We had a neo-Nazi march through the streets in our city in Columbia, Missouri. And so there was really a tremendous movement to connect all of these issues. Affirmative action was in danger in the state of Missouri. All of these things were happening at the same time. And so it was really imperative that we young people join this movement so that we could enact some kind of change for the 3 or 4 or 6 years we're there. And of course, so many of us move away after that, so it might be hard to sustain some movements that way, but we were galvanized and we were ready. We marched on the campus, we occupied the commons, we occupied the cafeteria, we chanted slogans, we petitioned, we did everything to try to enact some changes. And wouldn't you know, these things worked. We saved affirmative action on the campus. Numbers of sexual assault reduced on the campus. As a matter of fact, the football team just a few years ago decided not to play. They boycotted until the chancellor resigned, right? So the University of Missouri is kind of an activist home for me, just like Upaya is a spiritual home for me. So I learned how to prevent violence. And that was really tremendous for my life and for the path that I was taking. And at the exact same time, I met a Zen teacher on campus. See, I grew up Christian. Of course, most of us Black people grow up Christian. My family are still strong believers. I have learned so much from my Christian upbringing. I started exploring Buddhism when I was in school. And I met a Zen teacher on campus, and he started bringing students in at 6 or 7 o'clock in the morning with our cushions for zazen and chanting. And that was my first experience with Buddhism. And then I joined a local Sangha in town there. It was really excellent. I started studying the Pali language suttas, the Theravada suttas. I started studying those. And I also started studying some of the Zen koans, which was really, really amazing. And so I learned Buddhism, I learned violence prevention, I learned the path of peace as a young person. It was really a tremendous privilege. But nonetheless, I found myself working a lot. I worked 2 jobs while I was in college. And as well as all of the trainings that I was doing on campus. And to be honest with you, it was all a lot. It was really a lot for a very young person. I had a lot of responsibility at that time, and I didn't always handle it well. And on my path, seeking the path of peace and trying to find my purpose, I became afraid for my future. I was struggling, I wasn't making enough money. And so, in some ways, I ran away. I ran. I ran from my responsibilities because it became too much. I ran from my home in Missouri. I needed to find another path. And I became really interested in very radical politics, very radical, you know, like way far left. And I don't regret that at all. I learned a lot about radical environmentalism, radical feminism, and radical anti-racism. I became very interested in the Black Panther Party. I met Fred Hampton Jr. on campus. He came to campus to speak. And I stood up and I said, I love your speech. It was so amazing. And I just want to let you know my grandfather is currently in prison in Illinois, and he was one of the chapter members. And Fred Hampton Jr. looked at me and he said, I knew you looked familiar. You look familiar. Your grandfather's code name is Odinka. Odinka, that's your grandfather, isn't it? And I said, yes. Yes, it is my grandfather. He was like, you're coming with me tonight. You're coming with me. Let's hang out. And that's what we did. We hung out that night. And I drove with him back to St. Louis. And then was just chatted with him, talked with him so much. He was so tired. After we talked, he fell asleep in the car. So that was really amazing, an amazing experience. But I did run from my responsibilities, and I joined my family back in Georgia. And when I was in Georgia, you know, that was right around the time of the economic downturn, the recession. Yeah, Georgia was really roughly hit by that recession. There were so few jobs where we lived in Georgia. We lived in Beaufort and Stone Mountain, north of Atlanta. And there were very, very few jobs. And I started thinking, you know, it's going to be really hard to make a life here, but I love being with my family and I want to stay, you know. And my younger brother was a high school football star at the time, and he's way bigger than me. And you know, he could pick me up and carry me around the house, even though he's even though he's a lot younger than me. And I wanted to stay and watch him play football. And I have a twin brother. I have an identical twin brother. Some of you may not know that. I'm an identical twin. My identical twin brother, when he left the Marines, he was a Marine for 8 years. My identical twin brother served three tours, two in Afghanistan, one in Iraq. And he also joined the police department in Atlanta after he left the service. So my twin brother, my dad, and my mom were or are all police officers. Yeah. And my brother is no longer a police officer. As a matter of fact, my family is running a restaurant in Illinois and they're doing very well. So we're happy for them. But I wanted to stick around with my family and be with them. And I figured one of the easiest ways to get into a solid career was to join the Army myself. And I started thinking about it, and I started talking with my family, talking with my brother. He really wanted me to join the Marines, of course. He was like, you could be a Marine, just like me, you know, it would be amazing, two twins in the Marines. But I decided to join the Army National Guard instead, the Georgia Army National Guard. And as you all know, that's part-time service. So that's weekend service every month and 2 or 3 weeks of hardcore training in the summer. And I did that. I did that for 5 years. I was in the Georgia Army National Guard, and we served in an infantry unit. That's 11 Bravo is the code for that. Infantry. I joined the infantry. And the reason why I chose the infantry was because it was the military occupational specialty that was shipping recruits out the fastest. So all of the other MOSs, such as firefighter and EMT, and some of these others, you had to wait a few months in the delayed entry program. And I said, no, I don't want to do the delayed entry program. If I'm going to do it, just send me. And sure enough, they sent me. They sent me straight to boot camp. And we did 14 straight weeks of boot camp in Columbus, Georgia, at Fort Benning, Columbus, Georgia. That's where the infantry trains. So how did I get there? You know, I was taught how to prevent violence on campus. I was taught how to advocate for pro-feminist ideals, to fight for women's rights. I was part of Take Back the Night marches in the streets. And I found myself carrying, a machine gun in the army. And sure enough, inevitably, when you join the army, you're gonna get papers to deploy. It's just gonna happen. And sure enough, we got those papers. We got those papers, and it was Afghanistan at the time. We were told we are gearing up to go to Afghanistan. We're a combat ready unit. We're ready to go. And that's when I really started reevaluating, what am I doing? Like, can I really do this? Can I actually do this? Is this the right path for me? And I decided that it was not the right path for me. And I started talking with some of my other battle buddies. That's what we called each other, battle buddies. And some of them also thought the same, and some of them were totally into it. And I decided, I can't do this. And I talked to my sergeant and I said, if you all make me go, I'm just not going to show up, because I can't go fight. We're a combat unit. We're not going to be in the cafeteria. We're going to be on security patrols in Afghanistan. And I let them know that I'm not coming back. And that's what I did. I didn't go back. I needed a different path. And I left the National Guard, and I decided to become active in the things that really, really mattered to me. And I was contacted by an activist friend of mine, and he said, there's this organization called Veterans for Peace, and it's been around since the 80s, and it's mostly older Vietnam era vets, but we're really recruiting younger service members, both active and recently gotten out of the military, recently discharged. And so I said, wow, this is an organization of service members that I can be a part of and actually get back to my activist roots, to kind of do the work that I actually feel is in my heart, and I can avoid some of the tremendous harms that come with being in the Army. And he said, okay, well, what we're doing is you can join for free for 3 years. You don't have to pay dues, and you can run for the board right away. And I was like, wow, that's amazing. Like, what's a board? What's a board? I don't know what that is. And he said, well, these nonprofit organizations, they have board of directors and boards of trustees, and you can be a part of it. And I was like, that's amazing. And, the organization paid for me to go to the national convention. My first national convention was in North Carolina, on the campus of the University of North Carolina in Asheville. And that's where I met all of these Vietnam era hippies, that were totally against war. I mean, these were like conscientious objectors and deserters. These were the hardcore, in the streets, in their uniforms, saying no to war, saying no to social injustice. And I came in and I attended the national convention, and everyone was like, we would love to have a young Black vet on the board. And so I ran for the board and was elected to the board. And I served on the board of directors for 4 years. And we have a national convention everywhere. As a matter of fact, we were supposed to have our national convention in Albuquerque this year in August. It was supposed to be in Albuquerque. Now it's online. So everyone go to vfp.org and sign up for the national convention online. And next year it will be in Albuquerque in 2021. So that was a tremendous opportunity for me to move forward in my path, to pursue the path of peace. VFP is a nonviolence organization, but it's also a big tent activist organization. And it's really got a great influx of young service members as well. And so around that same time, I was also really active in radical politics as well. I was involved in radical environmentalism. I was doing anti-racism trainings on a People of Color caucus. I was traveling to conferences and things like that, and giving brief trainings here and there. And as a matter of fact, one of those organizations sent me to Boston for a pro-feminist conference that was specifically geared towards commercial sexual exploitation and online sexual exploitation, pornography, and prostitution and things like that. And that's actually where I met my wife, Sophie. I met my wife at an activist conference, which was really wonderful. And that really changed my life in many ways. I ended up moving to New York briefly to be with my love at that time. And then we moved to Boston permanently because she took a position with that same organization that put on the pro-feminist conference. So we actually lived in Boston for a year, to work for that organization, and I was active in the VFP chapter there as well. And then we decided to move from Boston, and that's where we moved here to Santa Fe. We moved to Santa Fe in 2016. And that's also when I joined the Santa Fe Art Institute briefly after that in 2017, January 2017. Santa Fe Art Institute has really changed my life in many ways because it is an arts organization. It's a residency program, international residency program geared towards social justice issues. So our residency program is thematic. We theme our yearly residency program on social justice issues such as food justice, water rights, equal justice, truth and reconciliation, labor. And as a matter of fact, next year's theme is right on time, revolution. Revolution is next year's theme for the residency program at the Santa Fe Art Institute. And I'm just so happy to have been there. I'm in my 4th year at SFAI. It's really, really wonderful. I joined Upaya, I believe the same year I moved to Santa Fe. As a matter of fact, we moved here and Sophie and I were both jobless at the time, of course, trying to, searching all of the listservs and all of that to see what opportunities were available. And I was also thinking, I've actually never been to a Buddhist temple before. Like I've always just been going to people's living rooms for Buddhism. I've just been sitting in people's living rooms and listening to Dharma talks on audio and podcasts. I want to join a real temple, man. And I started looking online and comes to find out there's actually a few temples here in town, which is really amazing. And that's where I found Upaya. I mean, I knew I wanted to do Zen. That was my primary background when I was in college was Zen practice. And that's how I found Upaya. And I joined the Upaya Sangha. I believe it was like probably September or October of 2016. And I've been active ever since and have been on the steering committee since then. It's been really, really amazing. One thing I really love about Upaya's programming is that so many of the teachers and so many of the speakers in the programs are very intentional about talking about social justice issues. And that's near and dear to my heart. That, I had always felt that maybe there was a separation between my Buddhist practice and the kind of activist values that I hold to try to make a better world. But it turns out, once I really dug deep into it, that's not true. As a matter of fact, it's fully a part of the path. It actually actualizes the path for me in many ways. I think it really moves me forward in the path. It gives me a sense of purpose and identity in my Buddhist practice, I believe. And I really feel like there's this tremendous connection between the bystander, upstander intervention and the Buddhist path. Because Buddhism teaches us to not run from the reality, from the present moment, from the things that are happening right here, right now in our lives, to not ignore it, as a matter of fact, to not color over it, but to be fully present with it, and to actually admit that it's happening, to be honest about it. And that honesty, that openness creates this tremendous vulnerability. It says that there's a part of me that I can't ignore with this. It's a part of my path. It means that if we have to save all beings, if we vow to save all creations, then that means in every single instance when an injustice is happening, that's a creation of our own making. And that's a being who needs to be integrated into our action. That's a being who needs that attention. That's a being we need to be present with in that moment. And Buddhism, I feel like, has really taught me that Dharma gates open up all around us every single day, in the grocery store, in the post office, at work and in our own homes. A Dharma gate opens when a disagreement forms. A Dharma gate opens when someone cuts you off in traffic, A Dharma gate opens when an injustice happens. And we know that something needs to be done, and we can decide. Here's a Dharma gate that says, do I react in anger and frustration? Do I take the path towards the hungry ghost realm, how do I respond? Or do I take the path of peace? Here's another Dharma gate that can open. Do I take the Bodhisattva path instead? And that's really difficult. I mean, we would teach our students when I was in the peer education program to stop and recognize what's happening and try to remember the training, come back to the training, try to remember. Remember what you just learned and respond accordingly. Well, that's a Dharma gate, right? And I didn't know that language at the time, but that's exactly what it is. And what does our meditation practice teach us? It says, when you're sitting and you're following the breath and you've got this anchor and you can come back to the breath. And here's a crazy thought. Oh no, I said that terrible thing. I just shouldn't have said that. Like, man, that was, what was I thinking? Like, why I know better? Why was I doing that? But I'm sitting right now. Come back to the breath. Well, that's a practice. That's a practice that we can take off the cushion and into our lives and say, something just happened. Like, this person just said something racist or sexist. There's a fight. Someone's fighting. There's disagreement. What do I do? How can I intervene? And there have been so many moments in my life where I've had exactly that opportunity. I've told this story before. Some of you have heard it. So I'm going to tell it again because I think it's really powerful. When I was in college once, I was a college kid. We go to bars, we go to clubs in college. That's what we do. And I was going to a bar that was also a club, and it was a really great band playing. And I was actually going with my activist friends, if that helps. We were going to the bar. We decided to have a good night. And we walked into the bar, very excited. There's a dance floor. And I walked in, and not a minute later, there's a disagreement happening between what appears to be a couple, a man and a woman. And suddenly the man takes hold of her, grabs her neck, right in the middle of the floor, in the club. And I'm like, gosh, you don't expect to see this when you walk into a club. Everyone's there to have a good time. There's a band. I mean, they were even like warming up on the stage, tuning their guitars and whatnot. And then this happens. And what do I do? And of course, I'm trained in nonviolence. I'm a bystander intervention trainer, right? And the first thing I think is, well, this can't go on for another second, right? This is an actual physical altercation that needs to stop right now. And so I went up to him and I said, you have to stop. You have to stop right now, or I'm going to stop you. And then I went to the bouncer at the door and I said, this guy has to leave, or I'm going to tell everyone in here what's happening and I'm going to get everyone to leave. And he, of course, the bouncer said, show me where he is. And he goes to him and he removes the man from the club. And who knows what happened later that night between that couple, but you know what? That violence stopped in that moment. And that's a training that we can take with us. We can say, how close can I get to this intervention? What skills do I have? What abilities do I have? And what is my threshold? Not all of us can go right up to the guy and say, you have to stop. I mean, I'm 6 feet tall, I'm kind of athletic looking, I like to think. I could probably use my body in some ways, not that I want to, but it's possible. But some of us can't do that. We can't all breach that threshold, but what can we do? Some of us can tell a friend to do something. Hey, I just saw something. Can you go get the bouncer and I'll keep an eye on this? And some of us can just go get the bouncer and say, can you stop this right here, right now? Can you stop this? And some of us can just, say, hey, oh, the band's starting, what a great show we're about to have. Yeah. Hey, are you guys watching? Look, the band's tuning up. It's almost time to play. That's another tactic that we can use in those situations. And just like we've seen recently with what's happening in our country, with the recent violence in Minneapolis, with the recent police violence, we all have a tool called a phone or a camera or something, our voices. I saw a video just recently where something very similar to some of these events that have been happening, and police responded very aggressively to an otherwise benign situation. And the bystanders, instead of backing away and being scared, they were actually coaching the police, saying, hey, we can de-escalate this, we can de-escalate this. They were being audible, they stayed there, and they prevented further harm from occurring in that moment. And I can actually send you all that link if you would like to see how that went down. It was really a tremendous example of upstanding bystander intervention. I like to think of the story of Jizo Bodhisattva and how Jizo intentionally moves between the realms and goes to where the beings are so that he can be of service. And we've all heard that term, right? Meet them where they are. I meet you where you are, you know? Well, that's what Jizo Bodhisattva does. Jizo goes to the hell realm and meets them where they are. But another thing that Jizo does is he doesn't stay in the hell realm with them. He doesn't become part of the hell realm. He goes there to liberate beings, but his mind is not stuck in the hell realm, right? Because that's the path of the hell realm. That's the Dharma gate of anger and frustration, instead of the Dharma gate of ease and joy, the Dharma gate of save all beings. Creations are numberless, I vow to save them. I can meet them where they are, go to where the injustice is, but represent that peace and represent the path. And one of my other examples, before I go over time, one of the other examples I love to use is the example of Avalokitesvara or Kuan Yin or Kanan, whichever is your favorite, and how Avalokitesvara hears the cries of the world, but before becoming Avalokitesvara, the Bodhisattva to be decided that she wanted to hear the cries of the world. That was an intention, right? And that's part of the Eightfold Path, right intention, right intention. I intend to be of service to all beings. But when you make that vow, realize what you've done, realize what I've done. When I made the vow to become a bystander intervention trainer, that means that I made a vow to close the gap to injustice, to close the gap to that violence. I made myself available, and that's scary. That's a vulnerable position. And sometimes your head can explode into 1,000 heads when that happens because the suffering is so great. But guess what? After you endure that event where everything opens up and everything comes right here, and now you're right face to face with it, now you've got 1,000 heads. Now you have 1,000 heads to hear the cries of the world. And now we are better equipped to respond. And some of us feel like, well, that's going to take some time, you know? It's like, I this is really tough, and I've got all of my own life experiences, and I've got all of my own suffering and my own traumas and my own violence. And yes, that's true. We have to be prepared to also deal with that. And so we need to practice. We need to follow the breath. We need to sit. We need to come to Sangha to support each other so that we can be equipped to handle that path. And think about it. We take the Bodhisattva vows, and we also have the Eightfold Path. And the Eightfold Path is just like having 8 heads. There's the head of right view. And so that's a mind that I can bring to this moment, right view. And then the next mind, the next head I can bring to this moment is right intention, right speech, right livelihood. That is a mind of service. Each one I can bring. So no matter how hard it may seem, all of us Buddhas and Bodhisattvas to be, we all have 8 heads at least. 8 heads at least, because we've taken the path. We have those tools to bring with us each time. So just as there was a time when the responsibilities for me were too great and I decided to run from it, find a different path, and being in the military was so crazy, and like I was gonna find myself in these really intense, horrible situations. And so I ran from it, run to a different path. We all find ourselves in situations where we have to ask, what can I do? Can I stay here? Can I bring all I have? Do I need to back out so that I can do some self-care and find some other tools that I might need? Those are all questions that we have to explore as we pursue this path. And I would like to say that I will continue to take the vow of accountability and showing up and being of service. I'll continue to learn and grow and make sure that I am not arrogant or dismissive, but being fully present, and fully present for my job at the Center for Art Institute, fully present for Upaya and for the local Sangha, and fully present for my family and my wife and my friends. And I hope that all of us continue to do that and equip each other and show up for each other, so we continue down this path, the Bodhisattva path, and we can continue to make this a better world. So thank you all so much for having me. Really appreciate the opportunity. Thank you. Thank you.